has been developed by state and provincial agencies in association with the Agency for Instructional Television. Together, serving education.
I'm having trouble with my stereo. I've been getting a lot of harmonic distortion in both the woofers and tweeters, and I should get no more than 1.5% at 30 watts.
What are you talking about? She said.
The problems I'm having with my stereo.
Well, of course you're having problems if you've got dogs and birds playing distorted harmonicas.
Not dogs and birds, woofers and tweeters. Don't you know anything about stereo electronics?
As strange as it may seem, hardly anything.
Oh, that's probably why you didn't understand anything I said.
Especially why you've got dogs and birds in your stereo.
Considering your audience is very important to good communication. Why? Because you'll be more likely to accomplish your purpose, whether it's to inform, entertain, or persuade, if you know something about your audience. Now, by audience, we mean the person or people with whom you're trying to communicate. For example, what are their interests, do you know? What's their knowledge? What do they know about the subject? What expectations do they have? What do they expect from you? Say you were trying to persuade someone to change his or her mind about something. Maybe that person was the principal of your school. Here come some of the girls from Elmview School. They seem to have something on their minds. What's up, girls?
Well, last semester we had these noon dances on the last Friday of every month. Everybody really liked them, and this semester they've been canceled.
Ah, I see. And what are you going to do about it?
Well, I'm going to go see our school principal, Mr. Harrison, and see if I can talk him into letting us have the dances again.
Well, have you considered Mr. Harrison's interests, his knowledge, his expectations?
What? I'm just going to go tell him what the deal is. Yeah, and she's the kid that can do it, too.
Anyway, thanks a lot for seeing me, Mr. Harrison. I know you're probably busy, but this is really important. The new dances are really important because, they're the only place that...
Excuse me, Darlene. We are talking about moon dance?
No. There's no such thing as moon dances. Noon dances.
Oh. Noon dance. It's a little hard to understand, you know, with the,
Thanks.
Don't mention it.
Anyhow, the noon dances are the only place that we can practice the new dances. When we found out about their being canceled, Sally... You know Sally.
Sure.
Sally goes, "Man, how are we going to learn the moves?" And I go, "I don't know." And she goes, "What we ought to do is tell Mr. Harrison or something about how really important it is to us, because it's our only way of getting together."
You could get together at each other's homes.
Well, yeah. But Sally goes, "You can't dance on a floor with carpets." And that's true if you think about it. Have you ever tried dancing on a floor with carpets? If you go barefoot, your feet stick to the floor. And if you go with your shoes on, you slip all over the place. And if you've got leather soles, you get static electricity that makes your hair all weirded out. And it just takes you hours to brush it back down. Now, Janice Foster's got hardwood floors, but her mom won't let us dance on them on account of we left heel marks one time. You see where I'm coming from, Mr. Harrison?
I think so. But what do Janice Foster's hardwood floors have to do with the dances?
I forgot.
Well, what do you think? I don't think she convinced him. On the other hand, when Darlene talked over the problem with Sally and her other friends, they obviously saw the point. The difference is, in this case, Darlene was not talking to her friends down at the local hamburger stand. She was talking to the principal of the school, in his office. Now, do you think he had enough knowledge of the latest dances to be persuaded by her argument? Do you think she acted the way Mr. Harrison expects people to act in his office? It's important to know about your audience, whether it's one person, like Mr. Harrison, or thousands of people. like the readers of a newspaper. This is Doug Brown. He's a reporter for the Los Angeles Times. He's also worked for the Washington Post. And as most reporters do, he always keeps his audience in mind.
I think every paper has an audience that it wants to appeal to, and that is based in large measure on surveys which newspapers do about the people living in their community and the kinds of subjects they're interested in. It's important to know who your audience is so that you can write as clearly as possible and so that they can understand what you're writing about. You don't want to write above your audience, nor do you want to write below them. You want to write at a level at which they could understand in a conversational style, for example, as if you were sitting there and simply talking to them. At one time, I covered the courts, and I covered a lot of legal issues. And in that kind of writing, you have to be very careful in terms of explaining to the reader legal concepts, not allowing the story to be too complicated. In comparison to that, I've done general assignment reporting, which deals basically with the kinds of news that happens on a daily basis, City Hall, major accidents, calamities, and that kind of thing. The reader who reads, for example, general stories that would appear basically hard news story is typically a reader who is in a hurry. It is probably the case that he is going to read only the beginning of your story, and if you can't tell him basically in the first 5 to 10 paragraphs what the story is about, he's not going to read any further. If a reporter does not write to his audience, there is ambiguity, people don't understand what you're writing about, and that causes people to write letters, phone in, to complain, and you get a lot of feedback from people who say, you've either made a mistake in this story, you don't know what you're talking about, and in the end you lose credibility with the reader, and if you lose credibility with the reader, you lose credibility with your editors, and you put your career in jeopardy.
Okay, so we've made the point that you should consider the person or the people with whom you want to communicate. Now, sometimes it takes a little thought. Say you had a wristwatch, it's one of those electronic types that does everything. Trouble is, it doesn't do everything it's supposed to. As long as we're supposing, let's suppose you wanted to communicate with the people who made that watch and request that they fix it.
So, what's wrong with this watch?
Well, if you push button 3C, it's supposed to tell you your pulse rate, but it doesn't.
Why didn't you just take it back to the store?
Well, they went out of business, so I'm writing to the company that manufactured the watch.
Listen, your typing isn't so hot. Why didn't you just write it out on the stationery your grandmother gave you?
Well, I was going to, and then I thought, these are business people, and I'm talking about business.
So?
So, how seriously are business people going to take me when I complain about my broken watch on notepaper with a happy face on the top and have a nice day across the bottom?
They might appreciate the sentiment.
I'm not talking sentiments. I'm talking business. That's why I learned how to talk to them.
How do you know how?
Well, I don't know exactly. I mean, these people have their business in Australia, so I can't find out about them directly.
Maybe you could hang around the old koala bear cage at the zoo.
I had a better idea. My mom let me look at some business letters her office has sent out.
About broken watches?
No, other stuff. It seems to me that business people expect certain kinds of letters.
Any happy faces?
Not one, but there was a pattern. Here, look. They all followed a form. They were neat. See? Return address, address of the person you're sending it to, and date. And they get right to the point. When these people in Australia open and read my letter, it's going to give them the information they need. It's going to look like they expect a business letter to look.
You know, according to this watch, we've been talking about this letter for 2.5 minutes.
What? It's not supposed to cuckoo unless you push button 9A. Guess I'll have to start a whole new letter.
Which letter would a business person expect to receive? This Or this. People have certain expectations about the communications they're going to get, and it is important to know what those expectations are. Now let's reverse the example of the business letter. What would a friend think who received this kind of communication?
Dear friend, it has come to my attention that you were somewhat confused regarding the proposed meeting at the record store after Pep Squad tryouts. I would like to clarify this situation. Hopefully we can reach an agreement.
You see, it all depends on who your audience is. What works in one situation might not work in another. So bearing that in mind, let's peek in again on Darlene and Mr. Harrison.
But what do Janice Foster's hardwood floors have to do with your dances?
I forgot. Oh, yeah, I remember now. Here, let me give you an example. Patricia has this cousin who came down from Montreal. And you know where they have snow. And anyways, they have this really neat new dance that we'd like to learn, but we don't have any place to practice. What do you want us to do? Go all
Oh boy, this is going nowhere. Let's give Darlene a second chance. Assume she considered her audience beforehand. And what have you found out about your audience, Darlene?
Oh, a couple things. The biggest mistake I made was telling Mr. Harrison about the new dances. I mean, I'm sure Mr. Harrison doesn't know much about new dances. And besides, they really didn't have anything to do with why the dances were canceled in the first place.
How did you find that out?
Mrs. Stedmeyer. She's a secretary. She knows everything.
So you did some research.
No, I asked Mrs. Stedmeyer.
Well, same thing.
He's really interested in the students and what they want, but he's concerned about expenses, too. I also figure I'll act a little differently. He expects people to behave in a certain way when they come into his office.
The kids were real sorry that you cut out the dances.
Well, I really didn't want to cut the dances, you know.
We realize that. We know that it was draining the student body fund. But some of us were thinking we could charge admission.
And what do the students think about that?
Well, I can only speak for myself and some of my friends, but we'd be willing to pay. I mean, if it were reasonable.
Okay. Why don't you and the others decide what's reasonable? And at the next student council meeting, we'll talk about it.
Okay.
Big difference. Darlene was able to make her case by targeting on Mr. Harrison's main concerns. Now, of course, there were other changes, too. Her thoughts were better organized. Her whole attitude better fit that situation. But it all came down to a realization of her audience. The second time, she had a much better understanding of Mr. Harrison's interests, knowledge, and expectations. So you see, there are all kinds of ways to say something. The trick is to pick the way that will have the most meaning to your audience. And to do that, you have to consider that audience. That way, you stand a much better chance of building bridges instead of walls.
Yeah, and she's the kid that can do it, too.
Excuse me, darling. We are talking about moon dance.
No. There's no such thing as moon dances. Noon dances.
Oh, noon dance. It's a little hard to understand, you know, with
Thanks.
Don't mention it.
This series was produced by the Tom Eberhart Company through the facilities of KRMA and KOCE TV under the supervision of the Agency for Instructional Television.